Hello, lovely Tech Sis listeners. Welcome to our first episode of Tech Sis, your trusted companion on this journey through your tech world. I'm your host, Kate Emery, and today we're diving deep into the intricate world of imposter syndrome. So grab a cozy blanket, your favorite beverage, and let's have a candid chat about something that affects many of us, imposter syndrome. Picture it as a campfire talk with your sister, a safe space to share and learn from each other's experiences. I first learned of imposter syndrome from a friend quite a few years ago. One day we were packing up for a robotics event, and after talking to me for the weekend, he just went, "I think you suffer from imposter syndrome." Not knowing what that meant, I thought he was calling me an imposter. Honestly, quite accurate for imposter syndrome. So I went home, looked it up, and realized that ultimately what he was actually saying is that I didn't recognize how great I was, that I was going to feel like an imposter no matter what. But I had never realized that this was a thing. I had experienced it forever, and nobody I knew had ever talked to me about it. The reality is that that's not accurate. A lot of people experience imposter syndrome, especially women. So what can we learn from their experiences? What can we do to make this a less lonely experience? Because as soon as you identify what you're dealing with, it's a lot easier to deal with it. So if you're not familiar with the term, imposter syndrome is the nagging feeling that you're not good enough, that you're just pretending, and one day everybody will figure out that you're an imposter. Doesn't matter what you do, you can't outrun imposter syndrome, unfortunately. There's women of all and people of all backgrounds at all levels of experience, of all expertise, who experience imposter syndrome every day. So what do we do about it? So with tech being a ever-evolving dynamic field, it's natural to feel like you're playing catch-up, no matter how hard you run, no matter how hard you work. So to a certain degree, imposter syndrome is especially common in tech and kind of hard to avoid. What is important, though, is learning how to navigate actually having imposter syndrome and actually dealing with it. Because sure, cool, you might not be able to get it to go away, but there are a lot of things you can do to make your path with imposter syndrome easier. So that's going to be a lot of our focus today. So before we jump into strategies to conquer imposter syndrome, let's take a moment to recognize the signs. It could manifest as self-doubt, comparing yourself to others, and contributing your success to luck. Does that sound a little familiar? For me, I'm most likely to say that I got lucky, even when I worked really hard. And honestly, these experiences are far too common for far too many of us, and far too often we're silent about them, leaving us to also feel like we're alone, even when we're not. So, I've been there. As a woman in tech, especially one who got into industry later in life, came from a more untraditional school, I definitely deal with a lot of imposter syndrome on the day-to-day. So let's look at how we actually get past it. Let's not let our imposter syndrome paralyze us. Let's recognize it, give it a nod, and brush it off. Great idea, right? Yeah, too bad that's not how it works for many of us. For many people, imposter syndrome never goes away, at least not fully. It changes forms, it ebbs and flows, but often it's still there. And that makes it more important to learn to truly deal with the symptoms of imposter syndrome. So for me personally, I will go through points where I'm not dealing with quite the degree of imposter syndrome, but I have a few triggers that make me feel really, really, really like I have no idea what I'm doing in life. And as soon as I run into those, I struggle to get out of feeling imposter syndrome about everything. So I'm kind of an ebb and flow kind of girl. So we're going to go into a few methods that might help some people with imposter syndrome. And the key is to just try a few things until you find what works for you. And that also might change as the ebbs and flows of imposter syndrome, as it little shifts throughout your life. So one option is to basically personify it. Name it, make up an image in your head of what we're talking about. That way, anytime that you hear that little voice being just kind of a jerk, you're able to go, yeah, I'm not listening to that. You can decide that it's your least favorite animal or even your least favorite person, whatever works for you. I recommend not openly calling it the name of a coworker, even if they hit the least favorite person. Doesn't help the situation, but it can be helpful if you've had a bad run-in as a child with a chimpanzee to think, oh man, that ugly chimpanzee is just driving me crazy today. And that's okay. For some people, that helps them have a little bit of an easier time lowering the volume of the imposter syndrome. Another option is to focus on celebrating your achievements. No matter how small they are, keep track of every single milestone. Start a journal, create a victory dance, simply share your accomplishments and wins with a trusted friend. I can't stress this enough. Write down your accomplishments. So it's really easy to forget just how big your accomplishments were during a week when you have something bad happen. Psychology has found that humans by nature often focus on the negative. So we need to make sure to be really, really intentional about those positives and writing them down and reflecting on them. And one way to think about journaling your achievements is building a ladder out of self-doubt, with every achievement being a rung that takes you higher, closer to your goals. I personally also try to write what about me those achievements say. For instance, on days I finished something that was hard to get motivated about or generally took a lot of effort, I write down in my positivity journal that I completed that task because I am a hard worker. Actually, recording this podcast is really nerve-wracking for me. So today I'm going to be included that I recorded my first podcast because I am brave. Imposter syndrome is incredible at depersonalizing your work and achievements. So it can be really helpful to not just recount your achievements, but to reframe them in the role that you played in them. It's not about luck. It's not about everybody else. Make sure to have your goals and achievements reflect back on you, because imposter syndrome will try and take that from you at times. Now, about a support system. Surrounding yourself with people who lift you up can be really, really helpful. Mentors, friends, colleagues can be wonderful antidotes to imposter syndrome. Share your feelings with them. Be honest. Being truly seen for who you are is worth the risk. Often, you'll find that they've been there too. Fortunately for them, some people have never experienced imposter syndrome. When talking to them, just be cautious if they're supportive. If they're not supportive, it's okay to not continue to speak to them openly about your imposter syndrome if they actually make you feel like you're more of an imposter or there's something wrong that you're experiencing this. Because there isn't anything wrong with experiencing imposter syndrome. It just is unfortunately a fact that a lot of us have experienced after generations of systematic deterioration of our skills and of the roles that we played in them. Women historically have been told that we got things because we were lucky, not because we earned them, that we're not as good as men in many ways. And so, of course, over generations of these things being told, we eventually internalized them a bit. And often that's where imposter syndrome really comes from. At the end of the day, our support system might vary. situation to situation. Not all my friends are friends who understand imposter syndrome, and that doesn't mean they're not great at understanding other things. They just might not be the right person for that situation. If you haven't yet, consider getting a mentor. Having a guiding star in the journey can be a game changer. Remember, there's women who have overcome imposter syndrome. There's women who have also just figured out how to navigate it, and they want to help you do the same. Everyone has a slightly different experience with this. So maybe the tips from one person can help you more than those from someone else. I'll be talking about mentors in a later episode, but in general, if you experience imposter syndrome, it's immensely helpful to have an imposter syndrome mentor who's a bit further on their journey, but also understands deeply what it means to live life with imposter syndrome. Don't ever hesitate to seek professional help if imposter syndrome is affecting your mental health. Therapists and counselors can provide tailored strategies and support you and help you navigate these feelings. In general, there are days it can be super hard to be a minority within your work setting. It can be isolating. Unfortunately, I know mental health supports are not necessarily accessible to everybody, but if you can't afford to regularly see a therapist, it can be immensely helpful. I personally have one, and we talk all the time about my journey with imposter syndrome. Mine's also intertwined with the fact that I have anxiety because unfortunately, sometimes it can be more complicated than just imposter syndrome. I personally also deal with profound social anxiety. Ironically, I'm now recording a podcast, but it's still a huge problem for me. There's days where I struggle to even make doctor's appointments on the phone because calling people on the phone is past what I'm capable of that day. That amplifies some of the feelings I experience with imposter syndrome. Both medication and therapy are part of my journey to lessen my imposter syndrome, since my other mental health struggles definitely make things harder. There's days my depression just tells me that it's not worth trying. There's days where my anxiety tells me that there's too much to do and I don't even know where to start. And the voice in my head, that's my imposter syndrome voice, is a lot louder. And the reality is that's okay. Everybody has it a little different. And it can be so helpful to just open up about it, have somebody really safe to talk to. Sometimes it's not, you want to make sure that you have people who you talk to who aren't also always right there with you in it. Sometimes it can be hard if one of my other friends is dealing with imposter syndrome and I'm dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome at that moment. I can't be the best friend I can be in that moment. And it's important to make sure that you have diversity of your support system so that you do always have somebody available who is in a place where they can be helpful. Finally, the hardest piece, be brave. You can't always stop that little imposter syndrome voice from saying you don't belong. I'm yet to make that voice go away. You sometimes have to simply take a deep breath and do it anyway. For me, I find myself doing this quite often. My journey with imposter syndrome started years ago with a friend telling me that he thought that I had it. But I didn't actually start to learn how to navigate it until 2020. I had decided I was interested in cybersecurity, and I refused to switch my major a second time. So I was dedicated to finishing my computer science degree. And I had somebody at my college post that Women in Cybersecurity was going to have this first program that they had ever had of this kind, where they were going to work with Google and SANS, who's one of the major kind of cybersecurity training platforms. And Google and SANS and Women in Cybersecurity were going to pick 100 people to do early training on. And then throughout the span of a year, that 100 was going to go through and get limited down to 15, then to 12, then finally to 10. And they estimated that a few thousand people were going to apply for these 100 spots. I did not want to apply. I was scared. That little voice in my head said that there was no use in even applying. And I was very familiar with that voice. And I listened to it most of the time at that point. And so I wrote up my application and I waited a week to submit it. And I literally cried as soon as I submitted it in just fear of rejection. That I felt like an imposter, and I felt like being told that I wasn't going to be in this program was going to make me feel like more of an imposter. And something really surprising happened. A few days later, we were told that so many people applied that they were going to have a capture the flag, where you do a bunch of cybersecurity challenges. And that I think it was 500 who got into the capture the flag. And from there, they were going to pick 100. And I was part of that 500. And I had told myself if I was going to get an opportunity, I was going to make the best of it. And so I got this invitation to participate. And by the end of the weekend, by the end of the capture the flag, I once again felt like an imposter. Surely I had not made it to the 100. I think it was about 2 weeks later, probably actually shorter. It just felt really long. But about 2 weeks later, they emailed us and I had made it into the 100. And at that point, we had another cybersecurity training platform that we were working on. And after, I think, 2 months, we would be dwindled down to 15. And I did everything I could. I owed it to myself. I felt like an imposter every day doing this. But every day I logged in, I worked hard. I knew that opportunity was mine to lose. So even if I didn't feel like I earned it, even if I felt like an imposter who didn't deserve it, I was going to do something with it. Then I got another email at the end of it, and I had made it to the next round. And it was an aptitude test. I had a solid amount of background in just computers in general in comparison to the other people who were at this point. And I actually didn't feel like quite as much of an imposter in this round. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to the round after that. But I had learned that maybe I wasn't as much of an imposter as I felt. So then about a month later, YSIS, Women in Cybersecurity, posted that they were going to have a scholarship for a cybersecurity competition called National Cyber League. And I went, won't be me. I won't qualify. I won't do well at it if I do, but I might as well try. Sure enough, I got the scholarship and I wound up being in the top 5% of competitors. And to this day, that feels like a somehow. But I know deep down that I know my stuff. Because I did it again in the spring. I once again competed with women in cybersecurity in National Cyber League, and once again was in the top 5%. One of the big pieces of my personal journey with imposter syndrome has been making it impossible for me to deny that I'm doing well. That doing well on one cybersecurity competition didn't do the trick. Doing well on 2 started to help. Then I did my 3rd, and I did better. Then I did my 4th and got another scholarship. Was one of the top performers once again. And all of a sudden, I started to realize I'm actually good at this. And one of the other things that's hard with imposter syndrome and with the journey of imposter syndrome is that often we're caught in this juxtaposition of being told that we're imposters and we don't deserve to be where we are, but simultaneously that it would be arrogant to say that you've earned it. Especially as women, the social standard has always been to be way more humble than any of the guys. I'm here to say that that's actively detrimental to your journey in imposter syndrome. Saying that you've earned something is not arrogant. It's important. It's important for you to be able to acknowledge that you earned it just like other people also earn where they are most of the time. That was one of the most revolutionary things about Simone Biles to me, is that this gymnast literally put a goat on her uniforms for the last Olympics she was at. And you know what? She is the greatest of all time. It's not arrogant for her to say that. It's true. It's a fact. And the thing is, it's okay to quietly and reasonably say that you are capable. It doesn't mean that other people can't also be capable. That's where it gets to arrogance. I'm not better than other people. I just know what I'm doing. I am capable. I am good at these things. And reminding yourself of that is so important when trying to get through some of these barriers. And it takes practice. The same girl who eventually, I competed in 4 cybersecurity competitions, winding up towards the top few percent every single time. I still almost didn't apply to some of my top companies when I graduated because I was scared. Scared of rejection. I made it to final interviews with most of them. I unfortunately didn't pass final interviews, but that's a completely different story. But here I am, yet again, the girl who is still feeling like an imposter. And what's funny is at this point, I have people who genuinely believe that I don't have anxiety, that I don't suffer imposter syndrome. One of my best friends at work doesn't think that this is a struggle for me, and we actually talked about it the other day. And the reality is that I have practiced being brave. I have practiced bursting through those barriers and taking a deep breath and doing it anyway. And it gets easier with practice. The more that you tell your imposter syndrome that it's incorrect about you, the more that you'll surprise yourself because you're giving yourself opportunities to do that. And I think that it's just really important to remember that every single technique takes practice, it takes work, and it takes time. There is not a cure-all for imposter syndrome. There, for many of us, will never be an actual fix. It's learning to navigate through it. I would like to say that I'm decent at navigating through it most of the time. I raise my hands for projects at work that I definitely don't feel qualified to do. I therefore get opportunities. And sometimes I do well at them and surprise myself with that. And if I let my imposter syndrome speak too loud, I never would have that. So hopefully today gave you a little bit more of an understanding of that. For one, if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, you're not alone. If you're not somebody experiencing imposter syndrome, most likely there are people around you who are. And be a little compassionate to that, because it's really hard to be doing the normal job that you're already doing and literally having to fight yourself mentally every step of the way for it. I know that it takes a ton of energy for me to get things done because my brain is not cooperative most of the time. Thank you for spending this time with me on Tech Sis. Remember, you're not alone here. Stay curious, stay confident. I hope you enjoyed our extended chat about imposter syndrome. Remember, you have got this. You're not alone in your journey through the tech world. You might feel that sometimes, but there's many of us out there who have been there and are here to support you. One of my favorite quotes from The Amazing Grace Hopper is especially important to me when it comes to imposter syndrome. A ship at port is safe, but that isn't what ships are for. I literally had this on my cap for graduation. You too are made for more than just existing completely within your safe little comfort zone. It's scary, but you're made for more than that. Go challenge yourself and become the best version of you. Until next time, peace.